guest speaker today, hosted by Asia Society, Texas Center, Ruchi Mukherjee, in conversation with Pico Iyer. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
You came to Houston in 1996, if I'm not mistaken, and Asia Society was the one which hosted. And you're here once again in 2009. How does it feel to be here?
Wonderful. As far as I'm concerned, Houston's become one of the great cities of Asia. I mean, all I've seen of Houston is through the Asia Society, and it's been such a wonderful keyhole to this city that's, I think, becoming more Asian every year. So I can't say I know everything about Houston, but what I've seen has been wonderful.
What is the strangest thing about Houston, and if you had to bring the Dalai Lama with you, where would you take him?
What a good question. Probably not to the airport. Well, we'd have to arrive in the airport, but I was amazed at the size of the airport. It's huge. I thought if I arrived yesterday at 1 o'clock, it might take me 27 hours to get into the center of town because it's such an enormous complex. And I suppose I've been struck most by the size of everything, the scale, and even the road signs around this hotel where we're sitting are on a scale I've never seen in any other city in the world. If I were with the Dalai Lama, I would probably take him to the Rothko Chapel, where I went 13 years ago and where I went again today, and to the little Byzantine chapel across the street, part of the Menil collection, and I might take him to the zoo, because he loves animals. But the Dalai Lama has a great gift for being interested in everything and everyone, so he would be the ideal guest. I think whatever he was shown, he would delight in.
If you had to tell the world about the Dalai Lama in 1 minute, what is the most important thing about him you want to share?
Two things. One, that he's a realist. And secondly, that he's so wonderful at being a human being. When you meet him, you may be daunted at first because he's the head of Tibetan Buddhism and he's a leader of his people and such a distinguished monk. But instantly he'll make you feel that you have something in common, that you're meeting your oldest friend in the world. And in terms of his political work, I've met so many politicians as a journalist, and most of them talk always about the future or about the past. And he's the rare one who's always looking at the present to see what can be done with it. And I think he's more realistic and therefore more clear-sighted than probably anyone I've met in politics or out of it.
What and why Westerners should learn about the cultures, government and people of Asia?
I think the most important thing is to travel to Asia and to learn all the indefinable things, the things that I wouldn't even be able to explain or to put into words. But I think the most important thing is that it's not such a foreign place, but in fact it's very similar to our own. I think whenever we think about faraway cultures on the map, we concentrate on everything that's exotic and everything that's different from our own. And as soon as we arrive in any one of them, we're usually surprised to see how similar people's concerns are to our own. Of course, it's easy in a city like Houston because you have most of the Asian cultures in your midst. And I think you can visit Vietnam or China and India just by going to certain neighborhoods here. But I think there's still a great virtue in traveling across the world to find out how small the distances are. For example, Tibet has always been almost a fairy tale kingdom for many of us. But if you meet the Dalai Lama or any Tibetan, you quickly see that they're not strange or distant from our experience at all.
You had a photo of the Dalai Lama from the time you were a young child until that got destroyed in a forest something. Do you still mourn about the picture, or it has been replaced by something else?
I think it's been replaced by something much more valuable and permanent, which is memory, or what I carry inside myself of what the picture meant and what the picture pointed to. And I think it was a good thing that the photo got destroyed, because the first law of Buddhism is impermanence, that you can't hold to pictures and you can't hold to the stuff of the world. And so for 30 years I was looking at that picture and I thought, well, I've got something substantial here of the Dalai Lama. But really what's much more important in his case or anyone's case is what he's talking about and the values that can withstand earthquake or tsunami or forest fire or flood. And so I think everything that was important about the picture, which is its meaning, is still with me.
In your book, of which we are going to talk today, is there something you feel you left out or you feel that you regret that you shouldn't have added?
You're asking good questions. I think this is the first book where I regret nothing. Maybe because I spent a long time on it. I spent 5 years, and I'd finished it after about 3.5. But I decided just to sit with it for a year and a half, day in, day out, so that there would be nothing that I regretted when it came out, and so that I would catch them before it arrived. I've written 8 books before this, and I think in all of those cases there's much that I regret and there's much that I would do differently. But I think just by spending 18 months after it was finished trying to look at it from every angle and make sure preemptively that there was nothing that I would regret. There's nothing I would change. Interestingly enough, it came out last March just as Tibet reached the headlines of all the world's press because of the demonstrations that broke out last March 10th. And so many people would say there were lots of news events that the book doesn't cover. But I think in the book I was trying to anticipate those events, and there's a whole chapter that really explains what happened last year, although it was written 2 years before that. So it's now been 14 months since that book came out, and I don't think there's anything I would really change.
Would you like to share a few travel tips, since you are very popularly known as a travel writer?
Go to McDonald's in every city in the world, because even if you don't eat there, because it will reflect the particular nature of that city, and it'll be a wonderful mixture of the familiar and the strange. As you know, if you go to McDonald's in Delhi, most of the items are vegetarian. This tea is spiced cardamom tea, it's chai. All the anarchy and swarm of the streets is right there. It's very different from a McDonald's in Houston. If you go into a McDonald's in my neighborhood in Japan, most of the customers are young ladies dressed in Chanel and Dior, and they're eating moon-viewing burgers during the harvest moon season and sipping Earl Grey tea, and it's all very, very genteel and elegant. If you go into a McDonald's in La Paz, Bolivia, it's more expensive than almost any other restaurant, and they actually have security guards and display cases with Seiko watches in it because it's such a status symbol to go there. So that's a simple way of saying even the things that you do at home that you take for granted when you're traveling, they become interesting, different, and exotic.
Do you think the 14th Dalai Lama has been or will be successful in transferring power to the parliament in exile?
I think he has already. And you're right, he's constantly pushing his people to take responsibility for themselves and their lives. And it's a curious, almost unique case in the world where a ruler is trying to depose himself and almost to impose democracy on his people. But I think he's essentially done that. His first year in exile, 1960, he made up a democratic constitution for the first time in Tibet's history, and then he introduced a democratically elected parliament and then a cabinet and now a prime minister. So I think very systematically, with his typically patient and meticulous way of doing things, over the last 50 years he's really set up his people to join the modern world in that respect as in so many others. So I think he'll be regarded by history as very successful in that.
You live in Japan, and you said you do not have a cell phone, which is kind of like a strange thing for us. You don't have a cell phone and you're not much on the net. How do you manage to do that?
Just the way I did it 20 years ago. Of course, I grew up and started practicing journalism in the early 80s when even a fax machine was unheard of. And in those days, I would write my pieces by hand and put them into the computer and print them out and probably hand them or mail them to somebody. And really, that's what I do still. So you're absolutely right. I live without a cell phone, without a printer. I've almost never been on the internet except for email. I don't have a car or a bicycle or anything, and I live in the middle of nowhere. And I find that every day lasts an eternity. It's amazing how much time there is in a day, and that fracturing, scattering feeling that we get when we're, if you're clicking like this and you're checking your emails over there and you're on the cell phone over here, luckily that hasn't entered my life. I find it a way of preserving my peace of mind and sanity.
Does that make you a better writer because of that sanity?
I'm not sure better, but different. A happy writer, I think.
Happy writers.
So yes, my sentences are much longer than if I were doing 16 things at once. So maybe they're out of tune with the times, but it's the rhythm that suits me. And I've been spending a lot of time in a monastery now for almost 20 years, and I found I was working in Times Square, I was spending time in the monastery, and really whenever I was in the monastery I was very happy and at peace, and whenever I was in Times Square I was always distracted and racing off to the next thing. So I quickly saw, well, this is much better, much more to my liking than the other.
And my last question is about what do you think about the existence of the Indian media in the United States?
Wonderful thing, and it's been one of the exciting developments of my life to see the Indian population and the Indian media proliferate in this country. I remember, for example, when I began working at Time magazine in New York in 1982, many people, for example, in Houston, the elderly people here, remember my name because I was the only Indian name in Time and Newsweek. And now, Time and Newsweek are both almost run by people from South Asia. And so I think just as the Indian population has probably gone up, seems to me 30-fold since I arrived, the media is absolutely in step with that. And I think that's an exciting thing because what happens when Indians come to America is a whole new culture comes into life and light. That's not traditionally Indian, and it's not typically American, but it's a wonderful mingling of the two. When you have a Texan samosa, you have something that's wouldn't make sense to an Indian 80 years ago and wouldn't necessarily make sense to Texan 80 years ago, but it's something exciting and new. And so I think Indian media is helping to chronicle and to shape this exciting new world where everyone is all over everyone else.
Well, it has been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and I'm sure my viewers are going to enjoy this episode. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much.